Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 191, and it is the 8th and final part of A Stranger in Goldenlode. And here we go. He felt weak, but not feverish the next morning. He decided that he could go ahead with his plan to visit the Nugget and get to the bottom of the Dunning situation. After breakfast, he took some time to prepare. He cleaned his pistol and made sure that it was in perfect working order. He loaded it and put it carefully in its holster. Thought about anything else he might need to bring, but if he needed any tools, Tom would have them at the Nugget. He was concerned that just doing that much did leave him somewhat tired, but at least he was not slipping back into fever. He ate and drank and planned to go out at noon. Until then, he rested, not in bed, but at his kitchen table, writing more notes about what he knew, had seen, and suspected about all that had gone on since the arrival of Richard Dunning in Goldenlode. The walk over there was chilly, despite the sun being high in the sky. When he arrived, he took a moment, partly to confer with Tom, Gabe, and Johnny, and partly to warm himself. Daisy had played her part well. They had kept an eye out, but not tried to apprehend Dunning. When he had rested, he led Johnny out to look again at Dunning's wagon. The wagon still struck him as unusual, and now he had a theory to work on. If Dunning was responsible for the rats around Goldenlode, then they may well have been hidden in the wagon. The base of the wagon had seemed oddly thick, and sure enough, after a few minutes of looking, Sam found a small hidden catch on the underneath. He banged on the wagon's bottom and thought he heard a few noises. He had Johnny stand well back, then popped the catch open. A door fell down, and several rats fell out. Sam swore, thrust the door back up, and fiddled with the catch until it caught. The rats were already scurrying out of sight. "Stay here," he ordered Johnny. "Don't let anyone at this wagon. If Dunning comes down and tries to hitch his horses to it, run in and get us." Johnny nodded, looking scared, and Sam went back to the Nugget. After checking the room to make sure no one else was close enough to hear, he told Tom and Gabe, still in a low voice, what Dunning's wagon was full of. Tom swore with a yell. The few people who were at the bar all looked over, and he put on a false smile and a little wave to say, "Excuse me." They kept looking. Sam ignored them, talking more in the same undertone. "The lawmen are all out of commission. I'm the next best thing. We have to apprehend Dunning, right now." "Gabe?" he asked, and Gabe nodded. "Dunning in his room?" "Well, yeah. He hasn't been out of his room for days and days." That brought Sam up short. "You mean you haven't followed him going anywhere? No one else has seen him leave?" Gabe shook his head. "Was I the last one to talk with him or see him? That was what, a week ago?" Gabe nodded agreement. "Then he's up to something. Let's go. Tom, get your shotgun." Tom grabbed a shotgun, not seeming to care very much that his customers were still watching him, and the three of them went up the stairs. "Key?" Sam whispered. Tom passed it to him. Sam put the key in the lock, nodded tersely so that Gabe and Tom would know he was planning on moving immediately, and pushed the door open. He tried to push the door open, but there was something slowing it down. There was a mass of movement all across the floor and some pained animal cries. Sam gaped. The floor of the room was crawling with rats. They were so thick he couldn't really see the floor. They writhed and twisted in their hundreds, and there was a horrible squeaking. Some dozen were already scrambling past the men. Tom gave a yell that clearly told Sam he did not want his customers seeing multiple rats pouring down the stairs. "Fire!" Tom yelled. "Fire!" He ran down the stairs, clearly intent on clearing everyone out of the building before any rats were seen. Sam paid only a fraction of his attention to that. He was still looking for Dunning. He closed the door behind him to keep the rats in. He saw there was a small armoire. He waded through the rats, shaking his legs to get some of them to let go. He yanked it open, pistol in his other hand, but it didn't hold Dunning, only some clothing. There was no other room. Sam looked at the bed and wondered if Dunning was hiding under it. He wasn't about to bend down to the rat-filled floor to check, so he snagged a corner of the mattress and yanked up. His illness was forgotten, the rush of the moment making all bad feelings flee for the time being. But while a large number of rats flipped up and smacked against the wall with light thuds, There was no man under the bed. Had Dunning been eaten by the rats? Sam wondered. But there was no sign of a body, as there surely would be, even if this swarm of rats ate him entirely. He left the room and closed the door. There were still a few dozen rats in the hall. Gabe had backed down the stairs, his face pale. On some level, Sam was concerned as well, but he'd already gotten whatever disease these things had and suspected he couldn't get anything else. His concerns were for Tom, for the town, and for the future. But most of all, his concern was to find out where the hell Dunning was and make him pay. He knew Tom would be no use. While he had no doubt Tom wanted Dunning strung up, he couldn't be expected to think about that while hundreds of vermin were squirming in one of his rooms. He would be figuring out how to kill the rats in that room without damaging his hotel. He went out back to check on Johnny and Dunning's wagon. "No one's been out here," Johnny simply said when he saw him come around the side of the building. Sam nodded and sized up the wagon. There was an open area out behind the hotel, flat and free of anything anyone would miss. He and Johnny pulled the wagon to that spot, then started carrying some of the firewood Tom had stacked out back under it. When they had a good start on it, Sam asked Johnny to go in, to let Tom know what they were doing out back, and to bring back any news, plus some lamp oil or cooking oil if there wasn't a nice big jar. Johnny came back out. No news about Dunning, but Tom was closing the hotel to the public until the rats had been taken care of. He was planning on cutting a hole in the door, blowing smoke into the room with a bellows and some pipes he had, and then hopefully moving in to kill the rats. He'd also come with a big jug of kerosene. "Use it all, Tom says," Johnny relayed to him. He had also brought matches. Sam had kept bringing wood, and it nearly came up to the underside of the wagon. He splashed the kerosene liberally all over the wood, and even some on the wagon itself. After making sure he wasn't coated in the stuff himself, he struck a match and lit the wood, which almost immediately became a bonfire. Sam realized he was exhausted. The roaring of the bonfire kept any squeaking of rats from being heard, but he had no doubt they would be dead very soon, and would not be able to escape. He left Johnny to watch the bonfire, asking him not to answer questions, since he saw people looking in on the odd sight of a wagon being purposefully set on fire. He also gave him a $1 coin. Sam went inside, where Tom had solicited Gabe's help. They were almost feverishly preparing to smoke the rats in the room. "There weren't any rat holes on the walls, I'm certain," Tom said. "At least," he said, his voice falling, "there weren't any before that scoundrel rented the room. I think we'll be able to get them." "Daisy said the mayor, the sheriff, and his deputies, they're all sick. Is that right?" "Yeah, the sheriff and the mayor are dead. Not sure about the deputies, but they were both pretty sick. Doc's dead, too." "Really? Damn," Sam said. "I'm amazed you pulled through," Tom said. "I guess someone had to," Sam replied. "You know if Jameson, the butcher, is healthy?" "No idea," Tom said. "I just had a thought that a man like that could have the stomach for a job like this. It might make him sick if he isn't already, though. That's a thought. He'd probably have some ideas on how to kill that lot better than we can. Gabe, can you run down the street, see if Jameson can be hired, or has any ideas or any tools?" Gabe nodded and went off at the closest to a run he had. Sam felt a great weariness now that he was inside where it was warm. "I don't think I can do you much more good, Tom," Sam said. "I should go home and rest. Johnny's watching the wagon burn, and it looks like there won't be any rat problem from there. I'd like to help you, I just don't think I can do anything more." "That's perfectly all right, Sam," Tom said. "You've helped me plenty. Go take care of yourself. I'll make sure someone gets any news to you." "Much obliged," Sam said, and got up to head home. When he got home, he was bone-tired. The energy from seeing the rats, from working hard to get the fire going, it was all gone, and he wanted nothing more than to sleep. He was woken up, probably around dusk, to judge by the light coming in the window, by a light knock at the door. "Who is it?" he called. "Daisy." "Come in." She entered, and he was glad to see her. "News?" he asked. "Not much. No sign of Dunning anywhere. They're watching the railroad, and they've got people going door to door trying to find him, but he seems to have just disappeared." "How's Tom going with that room?" "He's been blowing smoke in there a couple hours, since he's going to do it all night. I guess he hopes that the smoke alone will kill them, or make them so weak that they can't run when he finally goes in. Gabe is going to tend the smoking fire overnight. Then Tom will come in early morning with Jameson. Jameson has some tools he thinks will work to kill him quickly, though he says they're way out of my line of work. He grinned at her close impression of the man's somewhat gravelly yet high voice. He wondered if Jameson was one of her clients, if that's why she knew it so well. Then he felt ashamed of himself. It was not his business what she or he did. Anything else I should know? That's it. Need some food? Water? I have enough here, thanks. Still getting better? That excitement earlier took the wind out of my sails, but I think I'm still on the mend. Good. And good night, Sam. Night, Daisy. She left. He stayed up for a while, but then managed to get back to sleep. In the morning, he went over to the Nugget. He was feeling quite a bit better. Tom and Jameson the butcher had done their work. Sam decided he didn't need to see it. We got him, Sam, Tom said, grinning, but a little green, too. Sam wondered if it was from the unpleasant work, or if they had gone in too soon while the fumes and smoke from the fire were still in the room. He had no idea how many rats might have made their way out, and beyond that, how many Dunning had set loose. They would be rats to deal with for a long time, he suspected. He went out back and checked the smoldering ashes of the wagon. Some of the tongue and the yoke were practically intact, but the rest had burned away. A corner of the bed, though, was still discernible. It had indeed been built hollow. Sam looked but could see no rat corpses. He presumed they had burned completely away. Johnny surely would have seen if they had escaped during the fire. And strange to say, that was all. Robert Dunning, the undertaker, was never seen again. With the leadership of the town in shambles, Sam Lockart himself was made sheriff of Goldenlode. He was known for putting out harsh measures to destroy the vermin population, so much that the town in later years had a nickname of Ratsbane. Tom's Big Nugget had hard times for a while after the Dunning incident. No one outside of a few people knew about the masses of rats that had been found in the room, for they were all Tom's friends and had been paid well besides. So his reputation wasn't hit. However, word got out about the plague of Goldenlode, and it was a number of years before people came to the town in any great numbers. The mines had to raise the wages of their miners to get people to come at all, and as money often does, it attracted people despite the danger. And as the town recovered, so did the Big Nugget. Sam and Daisy remained on good terms, and he saw her fairly often as an informant. Lorraine saw the benefit of having Daisy be friends with the sheriff, and put her in her will. Because of this, Daisy eventually took over Madame Lorraine's when Lorraine herself passed on following a heart attack. Daisy was glad to have good terms with the law of the city, and in her turn she made sure that her place did not attract trouble. She kept the name of the place, and many strangers in town called Daisy Lorraine, mistakenly assuming that the owner must be Lorraine herself. Sam eventually fell in love again and married a woman, Anne, who came to town some 10 years after he became sheriff, when the town was clean and reputable again. His connections with various informants helped greatly with his job as sheriff, and Gabe and Johnny eventually both became deputies. Though Gabe still couldn't get around too well, he made himself very useful and helped modernize the department in later years. He even learned to type on one of the first typewriters in the state. Some 5 years after marrying Anne, Sam became mayor, and Gabe, to some people's surprise, but not to Sam's, became sheriff. And he remained mayor for another 8 years before retiring. His legs and his back were both getting bad, and he wanted to spend time with Anne. But he always had one ear out for the sound of a rat scurrying in a wall. And that's the end of the story. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Words and music copyright 2021 CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.